Alright, so I was going to make this a using my Facebook for content episode, but nobody really talks about religion anymore, like, at all. So I figured instead I'd just make a video titled An Assertion of My Religious Views. Alright, so I wanted to talk to people about religion because I think it's an important topic, and I think that it relates to politics to a big degree, and I think that my religious views relate to my political views, just like a lot of people's religious views relate to their political views. In fact, a friend of mine that I just got in contact with that I hadn't seen since high school recommended that I talk about this connection between religious and political views, so I am going to get into that with one of my beliefs. So instead of doing a using people for content episode, I decided instead to just do a regular wall post instead of engaging someone else's post and just sort of describe what my views are. I had some trouble figuring out where to start, so I figured I'd just list off 10 beliefs that I have in no particular order, and then just use this video to go into those beliefs and talk about the little bit that I wrote about each one here. Alright, so I think that's pretty much what that paragraph says. So, belief number one is that Western Abrahamic religions such as Judaism, Christianity, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology, even, all of them, etc., the Western religions are fundamentally and inherently toxic belief systems. Now, I know that's going to upset a lot of people, and probably a lot of people just clicked off the video and don't even want to be part of this conversation anymore. Before you do, let me explain. These religions have a history of warmongering, conquering, imperialism. I'm talking the Crusades, I'm talking expansionistic ideals, and I'm talking colonial ideals, the idea of going to less civilized places and civilizing the people who are there. I'm talking African slave trade by the British. I'm talking Catholic Church power. Don't forget the British, for a long historical era, were ruled by a monarch, and the monarch had a highly religious connotation to it, you could say. And then, not only to mention the Crusades, which was a several century campaign of religious spreading by use of violence. There was also the Holocaust in the 1940s, was backed by Pope Pius either the ninth or the 11th. I'm a little dyslexic, so whether it's ninth or 11th in terms of Roman numerals between XI or IX, I'm not sure which it is, but Pope Pius. If you read up on that, most of the articles will start out in saying that he wasn't with Hitler, but then if you keep reading, he later supported Hitler. So there's that. And then you have like the idea of a witch burning in general, like the type of mentality that it takes to burn another human being alive because they think differently. It's pretty powerful. So I think the belief system that allows those things to happen and allows those things to happen in the name of that belief system is a fundamentally flawed belief system and should be abandoned by modern people when it comes to 21st century thought. So that's belief number one. Pretty heavy stuff so far, but a lot of people might be on the same page as me if you listen to the likes of Bill Maher and Richard Dawkins. Those people are probably still here. Now, you'll come up with some arguments with me a few beliefs down, I'm quite sure. But the right-wing religious community, if any of you guys are left, thanks for sticking around and hearing me out. Props to you for that. Alright, so belief number 2. The fact that certain religious systems have become so integrated with our political process, that is, the relationship between church and state, that's grounds for concern on the grounds for the initiation of this discussion. So, that would be the concern about the relationship between Christianity and right-wing political ideologies, because you'll find that the church pretty much preaches right-wing political ideology. You can see this statistically too. The polling places that are at churches are typically more Republican oriented. The more churchy an area, the more Republican an area. These things go hand in hand. As for how and why that's the case, I think that's a good question to look at. I don't have all the answers, but it looks fishy. I'll say that. And it's probably worth looking into. Alright, so belief 3 is that no topic is too sacred to be critical of, and topics that are said to be too sacred to be critical of are often the most important ones to critically analyze, especially by the people who are directly involved with that topic. And that's the thing with Christianity, is there's some rules in there that you're not allowed to question it, like heretic type rules. And I think that's a red flag in and of itself almost. Like, hey, here's this idea. Once you hear it, though, you're not allowed to question it. I mean, think about that. Belief 4. Jesus was actually an okay individual and had a decent message. However, I believe that it is the case that most Christians follow the word of the Bible and things written by other people instead of the word of Jesus, but yet call themselves Christian. And they follow the Pope and their preacher and things of that nature, other men. Meaning that most Christians are not really Christians, that is, followers of Jesus Christ, but rather are biblical masses, or readers of the Bible that have massed together like a sort of reading group, who follow the will of the state, typically, and are aligned, or the republic, I should say, because they have republican ideals, and they're aligned with the right-wing political ideology, those very republican ideals, despite that Jesus preached for the political equivalent of socialism. He was a spokesman of the poor. He defended whores and thieves, if you read the text carefully. Ah, shit, that was a long phone call. Alright, so Jesus was the champion of the poor. He hung out with whores and thieves. He was a carpenter, working class person, and when there were people gambling in the nearby church one day, he went over there and he flipped the tables over and said, "Yo, the fuck are you guys doing in my father's temple? Gambling and blah blah blah." So he had an anger streak with him too. So he wasn't afraid to, flip a table over and yell, "What the fuck?" And whatever his own language would be, in their equivalent. Being that he hung out with lower class people, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Jesus used profanity potentially. Actually, back then, the only way you could use profanity was to blaspheme, so I don't never mind there. Profanity in the terms of lower class words is kind of a new thing. I think that started with the good German and bad German dichotomy there for a while, and French started having dirty words, quote unquote. So with Germany, it was a class thing. With French, it was, dirty and clean thing. And then, yeah, that's how we get our modern profanity, lower class derogatory words like fuck. Anyway, belief 5. Socrates was also an okay individual and had a decent message as well, on the same level as Jesus. And it's a shame that no one follows what he had to say anymore, which was the Socratic method of determining wisdom. Belief 6. Siddhartha Gandhi, Buddha, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, and other Eastern figures are also on that level as Jesus with the Christ consciousness, if you've ever heard that term, and deserve an equal amount of consideration from the modern world. So, let's talk about beliefs 5 and 6 as kind of run together with the ancient Greek philosopher from where most Western thought stems from. And then we have belief 6 with the inclusion of some Eastern thinkers. I've read a little bit about everyone here. I'm not an expert on anyone, though. But I think that, actually, I'd say I know about as much as of any of these fellows as I know about Jesus, realistically. Because who really knows anything about any of them except for what they wrote? I don't know what all of them wrote and what all of them said, though. But I don't know I don't know all of any one particular one, if that makes sense. So let's move on to belief 7, going with the scientific view with the Big Bang, some more ancient Greek type thought with Aristotle's motion that God is the first mover in terms of cause and effect, and that all effects that there are, or all things that are, came about by some means of some type of cause. Something caused the things that are. The things that were caused the things that are. Kind of works on a linear time-like scale there. And if you trace back all of these events throughout history and find this first thing, the thing that first caused something, the first thing that caused anything, you have the first mover or the first cause. And I believe that the first cause is not God, contrary to what many theologians and followers of that ideology, that monotheistic ideology, and I think that God is something else beyond that. In fact, the Gnostics, I forget which branch of Gnosticism it is, but they call that creative force. They have a name for that first mover idea, and they call that the demiurge. Demiurge. And that is a type of lesser entity. And they also classify the demiurge as arrogant because it thinks that it's special because it created everything. And that sounds so much like the entity that Christians worship to a degree. Christians and also the Old Testament version too with the Jewish faith. At any rate, I have some ideas about what God is, so if anyone is curious. Alright, so here I'm going to go look for some Alan Watts sayings and incorporate that with this because those quotes will resonate and I think it'll be better if you hear it from him. Alright, I'm about to mute my mic and call this fair use, and you can listen to Alan Watts' dream speech for an idea of what God really is.
I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream at night any dream you wanted to dream. And you would, of course, be able to alter your time sense and slip, say, 75 years of subjective time into 8 hours of sleep. You would, I suppose, start out by fulfilling all your wishes. You could design for yourself what would be the most ecstatic life. Love affairs, banquets, dancing girls, wonderful journeys, gardens, music beyond belief. And then after a couple of months of this sort of thing at 75 years a night, you would be getting a little taste for something different. And you would move over to an adventurous dimension, where there were sudden dangers involved and the thrill of dealing with dangers. And you could rescue princesses from dragons and go on dangerous journeys, make wonderful explosions and blow them up, and eventually get into contests with enemies. And after you'd done that for some time, you'd think up a new wrinkle to forget that you were dreaming, so that you would think it was all for real, and to be anxious about it. And then, because it'd be so great when you woke up, and then you'd say, well, like children who dare each other on things, how far out could you get? What could you take? What dimension of being lost, of abandonment of your power, what dimension of that could you stand? You could ask yourself this because you know you'd eventually wake up. And after you'd gone on doing this, you see, for some time, you would suddenly find yourselves sitting around in this room with all your personal involvements, problems, etc., talking with me. How do you know that's not what you're doing? Could be. Because after all, what would you do if you were God? If you were what there is, the self. When asked who is there, says it is I, and thereafter gives whatever particular name he may have. For if you were God, and in this sense that you knew everything, and you were completely transparent to yourself through and through, you would be bored. Because if, looking at it from another way, we push technology to its furthest possible development, and we had, instead of a dial telephone on one's desk, a more complex system of buttons, and one touch, beep, would give you anything you wanted, Aladdin's lamp. You would eventually have to introduce a button labeled surprise. Because all perfectly known futures, as I pointed out, are past. They have happened, virtually. It is only the true future is a surprise.
So, relating to that, that means that it relates to the Taoist concept of God as God is consciousness. God is all things in the universe. God is the universe in and of itself and everything in it, and everything in the universe is one in the universe because it is in the universe. In the same way a tree is in the forest, that tree is the forest. It is one with the forest. It's not really a part of the forest separate from the forest, but it is with the forest. in the same way that these fingers are my hand. And the dualism of Taoism comes with the notion that there is one other thing in the universe besides God, and that is the Tao, the background. Sort of like how you would say God is the ink and Tao is the paper. God is the consciousness that makes the form on the ink, the universe that is the story that is going on, and the Tao is the background that it is written upon, the paper. If you would think about that yin yang symbol with the black and white circles with the little swivel on it. Anyway, so that is what God is from the Taoist Eastern perspective, which is very different from the Western perspective. In fact, there's some mental illnesses in the Western world that have that sort of description. They're called narcissism is one of them, and the other is solipsism. Now, Taoism is different than solipsism and narcissism because the Taoist does believe that they are God. The Hindu religion, everyone is their own God. God is everything. The difference, though, is that so is everyone else. Whereas the narcissist believes that they are the only God, and that they should be, worshipped and whatnot. And they're very much about their ego, their false self, as the Hindus would call it, the Maya. Then solipsism is the idea that, well, if you don't know what solipsism is, never mind, but if you do, that's an incorrect philosophy as well. That's not compared at all to Taoism, because the solipsis doesn't account for the consciousness of others. They think they're the only consciousness. So they think they are the only self out there. Whereas with Taoism, God is everything, everything is God, but there's multiple selves. They're just not the true self, and each self is each persona or person out there, each mask of God. And these personas or persons get so caught up in the role that they're playing that they forget that they are God. And Christianity is what I would say a toxic mindset to our society and to our culture, our society of persons, because it's a monarchical position. It's set up like a monarch rather than a democracy, and it doesn't work well in a political democracy because it serves a republic, a established, how do I word this? I would say that Christianity limits the power of God within people. It disempowers people. Organized religion, at least. Because Alan Watts had some pretty interesting things to say about Jesus, too. Jesus was a decent character from the perspective of Watts. Alright, so moving on to belief 8, we have here the saying that God is dead. This was first said by Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century or 11th century. And what he meant by it was that nobody believes in the literal interpretation of the Bible anymore, the magic tricks and miracles and whatnot. That seems pretty far-fetched, but there's a sort of ethic to it that seems to be benefiting society, so why not keep going with it? But what do we do now that God is dead was Thomas Aquinas's thing. And then we have Nietzsche, who said God is dead and we have killed him a couple hundred years later in the 1800s. And again, he said it multiple times, but most prominently in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where God is dead and we have killed him came up. So I'd like to add to that for 2019 and say that thing that died wasn't even God. Look at that. And maybe that's God. Maybe that's what God is, brah. Maybe that's what God is, man. Brahman. Brahman. It's you. It's you, brah. It's you, man. Brahman. Oh shit, my mic. Ah. Che. Emphasis. It's you. And also, I think modern culture uses words like bra and man like that in the West, when the East have had this word and this term Brahman for God or enlightened person that has become one with the universe, become one with everything, realized their true nature, awakened to their true self, whichever phrase you want to use for it. And that terminology has existed for thousands of years in the East, and these words like bruh and man are very modern cultural linguistic terms used amongst today's youth. I remember in high school people were saying, "What's up, bruh?" And people have been saying man since the 60s. So put it together, you got Brahman. Maybe that's just a weird linguistic thing, but it could be sort of an unconscious cultural understanding, a sort of synchronicity between cultures. I don't know, just an idea, just a thought, maybe. But as for the death of God, though, I think that only relates to the Western conception of God. The Judeo Christian God is no longer really a viable structure, no really a viable system in our society anymore. It's no longer useful to us in modern times. It's a dead myth that is actually quite toxic and harmful to us. And I think it's something that we as a society ought to let go of and maybe keep a historical record of. But as for active devotion to Western deities, I don't think it's good for our culture to do that. I think there are better ideologies out there. And I think in order to make the transition, rather than what Richard Dawkins wants, which is for everyone to be to drop everything and become an atheist, or what Nietzsche wanted for everyone to discard the Christian value system along with the Christian ideology, I think maybe a replacement ideology is a better solution, something like what Alan Watts was talking about with the Taoist creation myth. Because I think that sort of ideology is beneficial to society. Because if all conscious things are God, then that kind of redefines what things like money is for. If we have a society and we have this tool for currency in our society and we're all God and our purpose is to learn, and if our purpose is to learn and the meaning of life is to help other consciousness to learn what we are and what we're here for too, then I think that would be a healthier belief system for society than simply just nothing or industrialism. Belief 9, I think everyone in society ought to understand the fundamental principles of utilitarianism, which is the ethical principle of the greatest good for the greatest many with the primary focus on the reduction of harms. I hope that's self-explanatory, but it might not be because I had a whole class on that topic alone with John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. But yeah, everyone's pains and pleasures ought to be counted equally. And I think the why for that because relates to the Taoist concept of God. So, belief 10. Karma isn't some magical property. Rather, karma is the result of what you do, and it is just that. The recognition that every action you make has a consequence, and those consequences will depend on the action that is willed. However, the effects of karma become more profound with a deeper understanding of what God is, the Taoist conception, in terms of understanding why karma is important and why total awareness can guide us to better decisions. So if you're aware about all the consequences of your actions and what other consciousnesses are affected by those consequences to your actions, and if you maintain an awareness of that and see the karma of your actions, then that will guide you to make better decisions. So my beliefs aren't fully formed and have a history ranging from the start of my life where I was actually brought up Christian, believe it or not, with an ideology like that. But then again, it is typically people brought up under a religion that later renounce that religion that become the spokesman for other beliefs, which is, I guess, what I'm doing right now. So, matching a trend, I guess. So yeah, I was brought up Christian, and throughout my life to the present day, I've gone through many, many label changes. I've been to many different churches, from Methodist to Baptist to Jehovah's Witness to Mormon. I've dabbled with paganism, Satanism, philosophy of all sorts. I've called myself an atheist, an agnostic. I've researched Hinduism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, Scientology. Scientology is weird. All the info to Scientology isn't really out in the public. It could just be a huge troll religion too, potentially. But yeah, I'm just incorporating ideas. I'd call myself a philosopher. A philosopher with Taoist interests. Also, as far as human evolution goes, you guys should look into the stoned ape theory by Terence McKenna. I think Joe Rogan even talks about it a little bit too. And that'll be an interesting little thing that'll relate to Taoism and how things make sense in general. Alright, let's call that a video there, and maybe I'll do a part 2 to this. I'll link this little topic here if anyone wants to talk about it. Let's scroll down a little bit and look at some of the comments I got so far. Well, the one comment. It's odd that you mentioned utilitarianism. It's odd that you mention utilitarianism, as I recently came to the conclusion that God is a utilitarian. Which God or conception of God? And he said mine. So he doesn't want to discuss it any further. That's fine. If he's sharing the Taoist conception, then I would be inclined to agree with that person. I think a lot of atheists, though, would be inclined to adopt a Taoist perspective had they been given the opportunity to grasp and understand the Taoist concept of God, because that version of God to me I think makes more sense, especially to more science-minded individuals. It does have some spiritual connotation to it. Oh my god, spam call. I don't even know what I was saying. Alright, I think that's pretty much a video. If anyone has any questions, thoughts, comments, I'll link this little Facebook thing here, and you can argue with me, ask me stuff, yell at me, troll me, criticize me, whatever. I'm open to it, and if enough people want to come in and respond, then I will make a part 2 to this. If this little discussion here doesn't go anywhere, then I guess that's it. But yeah, I think Christianity is a toxic structure. I sort of take the position of Richard Dawkins and Bill Maher on that. However, I don't think that atheism is fundamentally the right ideology for society. I think a replacement to Taoism would be better, because it's more functionable to society, makes more sense, and is more utilitarian, which is a pretty nice ethical feature. Plus, if atheistic people take a real long, hard look at what the Taoist conception of God is, I think that you will find it difficult to continue calling yourself an atheist. And for agnostics out there, the Taoist meta of the universe, their conception of it as everything and as you being the universe as God, then maybe that's just something to add to your belief structure. I think it's a better system than what Christianity has came up with, because people keep on fighting over who the one true God is, and people keep on fighting in these wars. We've got a Christian versus Islam war going on right now in the Middle East. And it's a resource war, it's a war for oil, it's a war kind of about religion, and it's a war about control and politics. And all of these things are very closely related to each other. The politics of resource distribution, the religious background of deserving. If you remember yesterday's video or the last couple videos, I talked about the notion of what does it mean to deserve. And I think that has a sort of really integral religious quality to it. And I think the reason why people who adopt a right-wing political view and claim rights over who deserves what, or claim the rights to judge who deserves what, I think that has a religious basis, which is why I think Christianity and politics ought to be more segregated, and that people ought to recognize where some of these beliefs are coming from in what they say. Because when people talk about certain classes of people, like billionaires deserving to be billionaires and homeless people deserving to be homeless, and it comes down to what it means to deserve, what is money for in society, and why. And that comes down to the religious. It's hard to tie this all in together without sounding like I'm just schizophrenic. But hopefully this essay did my belief structure some sort of justice. I don't know. I guess it's difficult because I'm not being asked any particular questions. I don't have anyone in mind that I'm right out talking to here. So I'm just throwing ideas out there. And I guess that's why it's hard to tie it all in at the end. But let's see. Basic summary. Philosophy. Think about things. Read things. Be open. Listen to an Alan Watts lecture. Type his name into YouTube. That is my advice. If you want to learn more about religion and philosophy, read the classics. Study Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. Read the moderns. Existentialism, Nietzsche, Camus, Sartre. Read the ethicists. Kant, Mill, Bentham, Aristotle to a degree with virtue ethics. And yeah, check out Alan Watts and Terence McKenna. And remember who you are, my bra man. And as Socrates said, know thyself. Real quick, I almost forgot to talk about total awareness. Total awareness is when you're totally aware of every sensation that you're getting. That means you're conscious of your breath. You're pulling in every breath. They call it manually breathing. You're aware of everything. You attempt to be aware of every single sensation that is pouring into your mind. And it's a breath-based meditation to practice awareness. You can meditate all the time, anywhere. Look up some guides to meditation. That is also important. Uh, Maybe I should make my next video on meditation. That could be interesting. Well, I mean, part 2 to this, if this gets any comments. But also, if anyone wants a guide to meditation, I guess I could go into how I do it and how I practice meditation. Also, for my atheist viewers out there who are not swayed by the Taoist conception of God, meditation could be interesting for you too. I know a lot of atheists who meditate. It is a breathing exercise that helps to clear your mind and reduce stress, and there's a lot of data on it for those science folks out there, and you can research that yourself, and once you see the effects of it, come back and ask me to teach you how to meditate, and I'll do that. And you can give me some watch time and some views and some likes, and I'll teach you how to find your true self. All right, peace. Alright, we got ourselves a little sideshow here to end with. This person says there was once a time when the president was honored The police were respected, newborns were treasured, and vets were revered. Let's bring that back. I've got a reply to that. There was once a time when the president was honorable. The police protected and served the people, and wars were fought for the greater good rather than for resources and for spoils. But that doesn't matter when the church gets involved with politics. Let's see, what can we add to that? Because then you have as much faith in your president as you do your God. And if that's not corrupt AF, IDK, what is? Is that too much? I feel like that might be too much. That might be crossing a line. Oh, I know who that is. Yeah, I remember that account. Also, not to have a Messiah complex or anything, but when I write comments like this to people like that who I recognize as right-wing fundamentalists, it reminds me of that story of Jesus going to the temple and kicking the tables over and being like, yo, the fuck are you doing in my father's house? The fuck are you doing? But yeah, because of that level of passion. Also, if you're wondering where religion comes into play with this, it comes in with the one thing that I didn't comment on, which was that newborns were treasured. That is something she's hinting at abortion, and basically, if you look at the abortion argument and study it, it comes down to religion, really. Like, there's not really any non-religious pro-life argument out there. Like, all the pro-life arguments are rooted in religion, particularly Western Christianity. And yeah, that's not even a political issue. That is a religious issue, and it's a dead issue because guess what? It's legal. You're not gonna re-illegalize abortion after it's been legalized. No. Get out of here with that. Like, that argument's over. Like, women have their reproductive rights. Pro-choice won. And as much as the church wants the pro-life stuff back, they're not getting it. So, there's that. I was hoping she'd reply within this 3-minute time frame. Oh, alright, it looks like we have some activity here on this post with saying big government is tyranny and hyper-militarized, unchecked police state, and conservatives are just filling up on both of those things. And we've got a comment that says the opposite would be just a cup of American values being poured out. I've got a smart-ass comment for this. Let's see, what values would be being poured out? Let's see, racism, nationalism, unequal wealth tyranny, oppression. Let's go with nationalism and religious values. And I hit that button. Let's see what happens. Alright, and the reply is no hard work, no entrepreneurship, and the Constitution. I think he means hard work, entrepreneurship is all one solid term. So, no, I mean hard work, entrepreneurship, and the Constitution as the two things getting, alright, dumped out. I don't know. Let's see. I'm not quite sure how to disagree with that. The ultimate question. I'm going Socratic on him. Ask him how. You say that's the case? Explain yourself. Burden of proof is on you. Here, you're making the claim. Alright, so that seems to have ended that conversation. Here's a little picture of the demiurge and this thing I found on Reddit that kind of corresponds to what I was saying a little bit. At any rate, that about wraps up today's topic on religion and politics and how they're entwined or integrated and rely on each other for their existence. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. Leave some comments down below. Let me know what I should talk about. Say something. Agree, disagree. Let's talk about it. All right. Peace.